I don't want to say I hate it, but I severely dislike it. Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for today's video, I will be doing a book review on Rage by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. And of course, I don't own a physical copy of it because they're very rare and or expensive, but I do have the Bachman books, which was published back in like 1985, which has like 4 Richard Bachman books, including Rage, which is the one that I'll be talking about today. And the reason I'm doing a book review for Rage is that we did our Patreon wheel spin like we do every month, and Patrick was the winner, and that was his choice, even though I told him that I don't like this book. Oh man, I really don't like this book. Spoilers, by the way. But before I jump into it, let me just give some general information about Rage, because while I don't like the book, it is an interesting book to think about and discuss, because it is the very first Richard Bachman book that Stephen King published under that name in 1977, and he basically started writing Richard Bachman books because he went to his publishing company and he wanted to write more than one book a year, but they really weren't going to allow him to do that. So he started Richard Bachman so he could write or publish more than one book a year, which he did during the late 70s and early 80s. And Rage was the first one, and in my opinion, not very good. I would consider it by far my least favorite Richard Bachman book, easily one of my least favorite King books in general. This is also one of the more unique Stephen King books because it is the only book that has been taken out of publication, and that was done by Stephen King because with the nature of this book, it has to deal with the school shooting, and back in like the 90s and early 2000s, school shootings became more prevalent, and Rage in particular was found in a lot of school shooters' lockers. So King really felt the need to discontinue the publication of this, which, you know, there's been a lot of controversy of whether or not that should have happened or not, but regardless, it did. Regardless of that, though, I still think it's not a very good book either way. For me, it just has a lot of flaws, and of course, I'll get into that more in the review. So enough of the preamble, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So Rage by Richard Bachman is about a kid in high school named Charlie Decker, and it's essentially about a school shooting, and what you get is Charlie Decker kind of getting very frustrated with everything, and he just decides pretty randomly to go and shoot his math teacher, and she's dead, and then he basically holds the class hostage, and it goes from there. And I don't want to spoil too much because it is rather a short novel. It's actually more of a novella length. It's like 170 pages in my edition. So even though I don't love it, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it yet. So just go into it knowing the premise that it is about a school shooting and a guy or a kid named Charlie Decker holding the class hostage. And like I said previously in this video, I really don't like this book. In fact, I really don't have that many positives to say about it. In fact, probably my main positive is that it's so short. It's very easy to get through. It's not like a very difficult read. 170 pages, you can read it in a day, but for me, it just has way too many problems. The first of which I'll mention here is the characters and the lack of good characters. You get the whole story through Charlie Decker's point of view in first person, and he's really not that interesting of a character. King tries his best to make him interesting and sympathetic and try to spin it in a way where it makes sense to how everything unfolds. But for me, he really didn't do that well of a job. Charlie Decker is easily one of my least favorite Stephen King characters, and in fact, I really couldn't name any other characters. Like, there's a principal. I have no idea what his name is. I couldn't name you a single one of his classmates. I can't even remember what the teacher's name that he shoots right at the beginning. the characters in this book are very forgettable, which normally for Stephen King books, even if it is a bad book, there is at least one or a couple characters that are at least memorable. A lot of these characters are just not memorable and they're forgettable. Another thing that bothers me about this book is the title. It's called Rage, but it really doesn't make sense for what happens in the book. The character of Charlie Decker is pretty much portrayed as a level-headed, nonchalant person who happens to shoot his teacher. In no way does it seem like he ever just snaps and goes crazy. He seems very level-headed, and it's just weird, right? Like you would think like a person who decides to do that, like they would be very impulsive and they would be just like all over the place. But after he shoots his teacher, he's pretty chill, which doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And then on top of that, with a book titled Rage, you would think that there would be a lot of crazy stuff happening throughout the book. But the majority of this book, after the teacher gets shot, is basically Charlie reminiscing about his past and talking to his classmates. That's most of the book, and it's very boring. The dialogue isn't particularly great, and the characters, like I've said, are forgettable. So if you make that most of your book, I'm not going to like it. I really didn't enjoy this book. And this is the second time I've read it, so I knew going into it the second time I was going to read this, I was still not going to like it, and I was correct. So not only don't I like the characters, none of the characters, not only do I think the title is infuriating because most of the book is boring for a title that's called Rage, another problem is that it's unrealistic, which King is super great at making even the silliest, dumbest concepts and premises seem realistic. Like you can really suspend your disbelief and just really get sucked into the story no matter how absurd it is, right? Like you've got a shape-shifting clown, but that's more realistic than what goes on in this book. But again, I'm trying to do a spoiler-free review here, and my main complaint with the unrealistic stuff is towards the end, where the classmates do something, and it just makes no sense. Like, both times I've read it, I'm just like, why? This would never happen. Like, this would never happen. And I've gotten feedback from people saying like, oh, well, there's this psychological thing, and I'm like, okay, that does exist, but in this scenario, it just seems so unrealistic. And obviously, King wrote this school shooting book way before school shootings became more prevalent in the United States, of course. So he probably couldn't have foreseen that happening. But like we get news of all the time about school shootings happening, and I just would never this would never happen. Like this would never happen. And it just seems like the most unrealistic thing that King has ever written, even though there are no supernatural elements in this book. That's what drives me mad, is that it's just not realistic, doesn't make any sense. And I really don't like this book. I don't want to say I hate it, but I severely dislike it. So on top of all of those complaints, I don't even like how the book is written to begin with, because at the beginning you realize that Charlie Decker is reminiscing about the school shooting. So already at the gate, he survives the school shooting. So anything that already happens to him in the story, you have no fear, or you have no real moment of tension because he survives it. So what the hell's the point? I hate when Stephen King does this. He could have made the book slightly more compelling if we didn't know Charlie Decker's fate. But Stephen King does this a lot in his books where he'll kind of spoil what's going to happen in the end or like an outcome of a character. And whenever he does that, it usually bothers me. He did that in Pet Sematary. Like, he just straight up spoils what's going to happen. And I'm just like, why would you ever do that? Like, I really don't like when he does that. And he definitely does it in here because you get him, like, thinking about the school shooting. Like, it's already happened. So if he's thinking about it, he doesn't die during it. So there's no moment of tension where, you know, stuff happens to him, but, like, he survives. So why do I give a shit, right? I really don't like this book, and I'm starting to dislike it more now that I'm talking about it with y'all.
This is, in fact, turning into a rage review.
So like I said, on top of all of those reasons why I dislike this novel, the only good thing about it is that it's super short. I read it in a day, in like a few hours, burned through it. I disliked it just as much as the first time. And, you know, pretty much in summation, Charlie Decker, one of the worst characters Stephen King has written in my mind. All of the other characters are boring and forgettable. The stuff that happens in here makes no sense and is boring, especially for a book titled Rage. Like, there should be rage, right? And the stuff that happens in here, even towards the end when it's supposed to get exciting, is just so unbelievable and makes no sense. So I really don't like this book. And I won't say never, but I will probably, well, you know what? Fuck it. I will never read this book again because I just don't ever see myself liking this book. So that's one I can cross off the list as a Stephen King book that I'm never going to reread. I really don't see why I should. All right, so that is my rant review of Rage by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. What do you guys think of Rage? I know it has its fans. I know there's people like me who pretty much hate it, but I know there's people who love it, or that at least enjoy it. So I'd especially love to hear from y'all. Tell me why you think it's a good book, and just let me know if you guys are interested in reading it, or just whatever comment you want to leave down in the comments below. I'll be glad to chat with you in the comments. And just as a reminder, this was the winner for the Patreon wheel spin. And if you're a patron, no matter what tier you are, the $1, $2, $3 tier, whichever one, you get to vote on which Stephen King book you'd like me to read every month. And Rage was the winner. And even though that I knew I wasn't going to like it, I still read it just for you, Patrick. So you're welcome. But if there's any other books you guys want me to read, feel free to sign up on my Patreon. I'll leave a link down below. You certainly don't have to, but if you like to throw me a buck or two, you'd get to vote for whatever Stephen King book you want me to read, good or bad, and I will read it. What have I gotten myself into? Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Book Astronomer Discord. And like I said, Patreon link down below if you want to go see what that's about. And I have my Amazon wish list if anyone wants to buy me a book. Certainly don't have to, but if you want to, you could. But anyway, thank you guys so much for continuing to watch my videos and support the channel. Thank you guys so much and have a fantastic day.